Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, washing the glass walls in gold. Chicago stretched far below, alive and distant, a city pulsing with noise that never quite reached the man standing in the quiet. Lorenzo Duca liked it that way: silence, order, control. The world outside could roar all it wanted. In here, everything obeyed him. He was at his desk, dark wood polished to a mirror's shine, scanning the reports laid out in precise alignment. The numbers meant nothing to most men, but to him they told stories of loyalty, betrayal, profit, loss. His hand moved with practiced calm, turning each page like a ritual. No hesitation, no wasted motion. A soft knock broke the rhythm. "Come in," he said without looking up. The door opened, and Maria Lopez stepped inside carrying his morning coffee on a silver tray. She always moved quietly, careful not to disturb the air around her. Small, neat, invisible, just the way people stayed safe in this house. Lorenzo finally glanced up. She wore the uniform the staff preferred: plain black dress, white collar, sleeves buttoned at the wrists. Everything about her seemed deliberately modest. She crossed the room and set the tray down gently, both hands steady until the final moment when porcelain met wood. "Your coffee, Mr. Duca," she whispered. Her voice was soft, nearly swallowed by the room. She turned to leave, but the movement shifted her sleeve, a fraction of a second. Enough for him to see the bruises. They circled her wrist like the imprint of fingers, purple fading to yellow at the edges, old pain layered over new. She noticed his eyes and froze. For one breath, neither of them moved. Lorenzo saw everything in that instant. The way her shoulders tightened, the way her hand curled into a fist to pull the fabric back down. The tremor she tried to hide. "What happened to your wrist?" he asked, her voice faltered. "Nothing, sir. I'm clumsy. I bumped into the cabinet door yesterday." She forced a small laugh that cracked at the edges. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You bump into a cabinet hard enough to leave finger marks?" She swallowed. Yes, sir. I'll be more careful." The lie was obvious, but Lorenzo didn't push. Interrogation was an art, and fear made people lie faster than truth ever could. He let the silence stretch, heavy enough to make her shift her weight from one foot to the other. "Thank you for the coffee," he said finally. Maria nodded quickly, relief flickering in her eyes. "Of course." She turned, almost fled, the door clicking shut behind her. Lorenzo stared at the cup she'd left. The steam curled upward, twisting into shapes that dissolved in the light. A bruise, a lie, fear. He'd seen it all before. On the streets, in his enemies, in the broken people the city spat out. But not here. Not under his roof. He didn't tolerate fear here unless he was the cause of it. He stood, walked to the window and looked out over the skyline. Chicago gleamed in the distance, full of men who thought they could hurt whoever they pleased and hide behind uniforms or money. Someone had hurt Maria Lopez. Someone thought they could do it without consequence. Lorenzo's reflection stared back at him from the glass. Sharp suit, cold eyes, the faintest trace of anger buried under calm. He picked up the phone on his desk. His voice was low, controlled, but there was steel beneath it. "Mrs. Chun," he said. "My office. Now." 3 minutes later, his housekeeper would step through that same door. And by the end of the day, he'd know everything there was to know about Maria Lopez. Lorenzo set the phone down and glanced once more toward the door she had used. No one bruised people under his protection, not without paying for it. Rain pressed softly against the glass walls of the penthouse, as Chicago woke beneath a gray morning sky. Lorenzo Duca stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, his mind circling back to the small, frightened woman who had served him an hour ago. Maria Lopez. The image of her trembling fingers haunted him more than he cared to admit. He'd seen fear before, but this was different. It was quiet fear, the kind that came from someone used to being hurt and used to hiding it. Mrs. Chun entered the room without knocking. 30 years in his service made her one of the few who could. She read the tension on his face before he even spoke. "You saw something," she said. "Bruises. On both wrists." Lorenzo's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "She said she was clumsy. You and I both know that's a lie." Mrs. Chun sighed, lowering herself into a chair. "She's a good worker. Never late, never complains. I didn't notice anything strange. Lorenzo turned from the window. Find out where she lives, who she stays with, what she's hiding from. I'll have Marco discreetly follow her after work. If someone's hurting her, I want a name. He didn't raise his voice, but the order carried weight. Mrs. Chun nodded, though worry clouded her face. Lorenzo Duca didn't get involved in the lives of his staff. Not ever. But this was different. There was something about that woman's silence that scraped against his instincts that evening in a narrow neighborhood on the south side. Rain slicked the streets in mirrors of light. Maria walked home fast, her coat pulled tight. Every few steps, she looked over her shoulder. Behind her, a dark sedan rolled slowly down the block, its headlights off. She didn't see it, but a man across the street did. Marco, one of Lorenzo's men, raised his phone and took a picture back at the mansion. Lorenzo sat in his study, reviewing reports he wasn't really reading when Marco entered, water dripping from his coat. "Boss, you'll want to see this." He slid a phone across the desk. The image was grainy but clear enough. A car, a face partly caught by streetlight. Male, early 40s, uniform collar visible. Police. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. She's being watched, not by some thug, by a cop. Marco nodded. He's not following anyone else. I tailed them for an hour. She walked into her apartment. He parked across the street and waited. Half an hour. Then drove off. Lorenzo leaned back, his mind turning. A cop. That explained the bruises, the fear, the silence. Someone who could hurt her and get away with it. Someone who believed the badge made him untouchable. "Thank you," Lorenzo said. "Keep eyes on her. Don't let her know." Marco hesitated. "You think she's in real danger?" Lorenzo looked up, and for a moment, the calm mask slipped just enough to reveal what lay beneath. Someone already hurt her. "I intend to make sure they never do again. Later." As the rain eased, Lorenzo stood once more at the window, the city lights burning in reflection. His empire was built on rules, on fear, on knowing which battles to fight. But this one wasn't business. This one was personal. Outside, lightning flickered across the skyline. Lorenzo picked up his phone and dialed Tony Messina, his head of security. "Tony, I need a full background check on Maria Lopez. Employment, family, everything. And find out who drives a dark blue sedan with partial plate number 8J7. I want the name before morning." He ended the call and poured himself another drink. The bruise on her wrist had started something he couldn't ignore. The storm outside cracked again, echoing against the glass, and Lorenzo muttered quietly to himself, "You picked the wrong woman to hurt." Night fell heavy over Chicago. The next day, the city's skyline shimmered with restless light. But inside Lorenzo Duca's mansion, the air was different, tighter, darker. Something unseen was moving beneath the surface. Lorenzo sat in his study, the flicker from his desk lamp cutting across his sharp features. A manila folder lay open in front of him, filled with photographs, police records, and a marriage certificate that made his blood run colder each time he looked at it. Maria Lopez once. Maria Mitchell, wife of Officer Derek Mitchell, Chicago Police Department. Divorced 8 months ago. 2 reports of domestic disturbance. No arrests, no charges, no protection. The ink on the restraining order had faded like the justice she never received, to knee. Messina stood across from him, arms crossed, his voice low. She filed complaints twice. Boss both times, he pulled strings. His uncle's a deputy chief, whole precinct looks out for him. The guy's untouchable. Lorenzo tapped his finger against the desk, every movement measured. "We both know nobody's untouchable, Tony. I want to know everything: where he drinks, who he talks to, what time he breathes." Tony frowned. "If we start digging too deep, the department might notice." Lorenzo's gaze lifted cold, and unflinching let them notice. He rose from his chair, walking to the window, where rain smeared the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. The reflection of his own face stared back at him, and for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back. He'd spent a lifetime building walls that kept emotion out and power in. But now he found himself thinking about a maid's trembling hands instead of his business deal. She didn't know why it bothered him so much. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Not with fear of his power, but with fear of the world outside. The way her silence felt heavier than screams. She had learned to hide her pain so deeply that it took a man like him to see it. Mrs. Chun entered. quietly holding a steaming cup of tea, her eyes searching his face before speaking. I spoke with her again. She's worse than I thought. Barely sleeps. Hears noises outside her apartment every night, says she's imagining things. But I don't think. She is. Lorenzo turned his head slightly, his voice softer. Did she mention him? No, but she didn't have to. Her hands shook so much she nearly dropped her cup. Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He answered on the first ring. Marco's voice came through sharp. Boss, you need to see this. We just pulled camera footage from last night. That blue sedan was parked near the bus stop again. Only this time he got out. Lorenzo's pulse slowed dangerously. Show me. 15 minutes later they stood in the surveillance room, a wall of monitors casting pale light across their faces. Marco hit play. The footage showed Maria walking down the street. Purse clutched tight, shoulders hunched. The car stopped behind her. The driver stepped out. Uniform, half-unbuttoned face, partially visible Derek Mitchell. Even through the grain of the footage, his arrogance bled through. Maria looked over her shoulder, froze, then hurried faster. He followed close, too close. She turned at the intersection. Clearly pleading with him, he reached out, grabbed her arm, dragged her toward the shadows under a street lamp. Lorenzo's hands curled into fists. That was when it happened. On the screen, she struggled, pulling away, but his grip only tightened. Her face turned away, but her body spoke volumes. Fear, submission, exhaustion. Then a passing car's headlights flashed, and he released her, shoving her back. She stumbled against a wall. He walked away like nothing had happened. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of electronics. Tony muttered, Jesus, boss. She's lucky that driver came by. Lorenzo's jaw flexed. She's not lucky, Tony. She's trapped, and we're going to change that. What do you want us to do? Tony asked, his voice careful, like he already knew the answer. Lorenzo's eyes stayed on the frozen image of Maria's terrified face. Build me a file on him. Everything the department hides. Everything his uncle buries. And when we have it, we'll make sure the city sees what kind of man wears their badge. And the girl? Tony asked softly. Lorenzo's voice dropped lower. Protect her. She doesn't know it yet, but she's not alone anymore. As the monitors dimmed, Lorenzo turned back toward the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the city still and waiting somewhere. Out there, a man in uniform slept, believing he was safe, believing power would protect him. But Lorenzo Duca had just declared war, and Chicago was about to remember what fear really looked like. The night after the footage, everything in the mansion changed. Lorenzo Duca's world ran on quiet precision. But now there was an undercurrent pulsing through the walls like a warning. His people moved faster. His orders came sharper, and every name connected to Officer Derek Mitchell was being dragged into the light. In the dimly lit study, Lorenzo stood over a table covered in files, photographs, and police rosters. Red strings connected names like veins in a map of corruption. Marco sat in front of a laptop, fingers flying as lines of code opened, sealed databases. Tony leaned against the wall, flipping through financial reports. His expression hard. He's been taking cash under the table for years. Tony said extortion, bribes, even fixing traffic tickets. But there's more. His partner, Webb, is dirty too, and guess who keeps covering the paperwork? His uncle, Deputy Chief Vincent Mitchell. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. So the family protects the family, he murmured. No wonder she never stood a chance. Marco looked up from his screen. Boss, there's something else you need to see. He pressed a key, and the largest monitor flickered to life, showing a series of security photos taken over the last 48 hours. Derek Mitchell outside Maria's apartment building, sitting in his car, watching, her window waiting. Mrs. Chun had begged Maria to take the week off, but Maria refused. She said she needed the paycheck. Said she didn't want to run. She'd lived too long being afraid. Lorenzo respected that. But he also knew courage without protection was a death wish. He turned from the screen, his voice cold but controlled. Find out if he's still on active duty. Marco hesitated. Technically. Yes, he's on administrative leave, badge gun still in his possession pending internal review. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. That ends tonight? Tony frowned. You planning to take him out, boss? Because that's going to bring heat real fast. Lorenzo shook his head. Not yet, but we're going to pull his mask off piece by piece until everyone who ever shook his hand spits at the mention of his name by midnight. The storm had rolled back over Chicago lightning, crawling across the skyline, the kind of weather that made the city feel alive and dangerous. Lorenzo's black car cut through the rain-headed south, toward a warehouse by the river, the place where truths were pulled from shadows. Inside, a single bulb swung overhead, illuminating 3 men sitting at a metal table. 2 of them detectives from Derek's district, both already sweating despite the cold air. Lorenzo entered, wearing a black coat, water dripping from the hem. His presence was enough to silence the room. One of the detectives stammered, "Duca, what is this? We're not enemies here." Lorenzo placed a folder on the table without a word. Inside were photos, timestamps, bank records, and one damning signature. Both detectives froze. The money trail led straight to them. "You've been protecting a cop who beats women," Lorenzo said quietly, his voice carrying more threat than if he'd shouted, "You're going to fix that starting tonight, or I'll make sure your names are the next ones all over the evening news." They exchanged terrified glances. One finally whispered, "What do you want?" Lorenzo leaned closer. "I want Derek Mitchell, alone, isolated, disgraced, and stripped of his badge. You're going to make that happen. You'll give internal affairs exactly what they need, and when you do, you'll both sleep easier, knowing you picked the right side." He turned and walked out, leaving the files behind the door slammed shut behind him. Thunder rolled above, and the city swallowed the sound back at the mansion. Maria lay awake in her small room, her phone clutched in her hand. She thought about calling the number Lorenzo had given her, but didn't. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't know that at that same moment, his men were stationed outside her building. 2 cars deep in the shadows. Lorenzo stood once more by the window. Rain running down the glass, his reflection sharp against the city lights. He didn't know when the line between justice and vengeance had blurred. Maybe it never mattered. What mattered was that Maria Lopez would never flinch again when someone said the word police. The city didn't know it yet, but by sunrise, Officer Derek Mitchell's world would start to crumble, and every door he'd once opened with his badge would slam in his face, because Lorenzo Duca had decided that monsters wearing uniforms deserved to be hunted too. The storm that tore through Chicago the night before left the city washed clean, but the air carried something else, an unease that settled in the bones of those who knew what was coming. Lorenzo Duca stood in the kitchen at dawn, his sleeves rolled, up a coffee cup, cooling untouched on the counter. He rarely felt nerves. But this morning something hummed beneath his calm like electricity waiting to strike. Mrs. Chun entered quietly. She'd been with him long enough to recognize the signs when he was planning something dangerous. She studied his face before speaking. "She's early again, Maria. She's downstairs cleaning already." Lorenzo's eyes lifted. The same woman who'd faced her abuser without protection now refused to take a single day off. He almost admired that strength, almost feared it too because it made her unpredictable. "Send her up," he said after a moment. Mrs. Chun hesitated. "Sir, you sure?" Lorenzo nodded. "She deserves to know." Minutes later, Maria stepped into the study carrying a small basket of linens. She froze when she saw him waiting by the window. Her instinct was to retreat, but his voice stopped her close. "The door, please." She obeyed, her heart beating fast. He turned then, and there was no coldness in his eyes, only something unreadable. "Sit down," he said. She hesitated, then sat clutching the fabric in her lap. He poured her a cup of coffee and placed it in front of her. She stared at it, confused. No one ever served her in this house. He studied her face, the fading bruises. Beneath her makeup, the exhaustion carved into her eyes. "You didn't sleep last night?" She looked down. "I couldn't." Every sound outside felt like him. He nodded slowly. "I know about him, Maria." Her breath caught what he did to you. What he's still. Trying to do the lies, the control, the fear. "I know everything now." For a heartbeat. She couldn't move the words, hit harder than any slap she'd taken from Derek. Tears welled in her eyes. "How do you know who told you? Doesn't matter what matters. Is that it ends today?" She shook her head. "No, you don't understand. He's a cop, he'll destroy you too." Lorenzo smiled faintly. "That's the difference between us, Maria. I don't destroy easily." Her hands trembled. "You can't fight the police." Lorenzo stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I'm not fighting the police. I'm fighting a man who hides behind a badge." There's a difference. The fear in her face shifted into confusion, then disbelief. "You're serious? Why would you do this for me? You work for me. That means you're under my protection, and there are rules in this house. No one hurts what's mine." Tears broke free. She covered her mouth, trying to hold them back. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like armor around her. The first warmth she'd felt in months. Tony burst through the door without knocking. "Boss, we got something." Derek Mitchell just met with a reporter outside his precinct trying to spin the story. Said he's being framed by organized crime. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Desperate. Men always shout the loudest before they fall. What's the press saying? Not much yet, but once we release what we have, he's done. Maria turned to Lorenzo. Panic returning, "Please don't involve me. I can't go through that again." "You won't have to," he said firmly. "You'll stay here for a few days. No arguments until this is over. Mrs. Chun will take care of everything." She opened her mouth to protest, but his tone left no space for refusal. Tony's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and looked up. Grim. Serious. The reporter leaked already, boss. Half the city's reading about Mitchell's financials. The other half's digging through his complaints. Lorenzo's gaze darkened. Good. Then let them dig. Deeper. He turned back to Maria. Go to your room. Pack a small bag. She hesitated. Why? Because tonight you're leaving here with a security team? Until I say otherwise. Where am I going? Somewhere safe in you? She asked quietly. His expression softened, just a fraction. I'll be exactly where I need to be. Outside thunder rolled again. Though the sky was clear, it felt like the city itself was warning what came next would not be quiet. Lorenzo Duca had just declared the next move in a war that would shake Chicago's streets to their foundations, and Maria Lopez, without realizing it, had become the reason a mafia boss was about to challenge the system built to protect men like Derek Mitchell. The following night, Chicago pulsed with tension, the kind that wrapped around the city's heart and squeezed until even the air felt heavy on the rooftops of the Duca mansion. Men moved silently, setting up surveillance links. Cars came and went. Headlights dimmed all under Lorenzo's orders. No one, outside his inner circle, knew what he was preparing for. Not the police. Not the press. Not even Maria. Inside the study, he stood surrounded by the low hum of computers and screens. Each one tracking a piece of a plan. Years of power and discipline had made him dangerous. But this was different. This was personal. Marco typed rapidly. The walls of the Chicago police server falling open one by one. Lorenzo's jaw tightened when he saw what came up. Internal affairs reports, redacted complaints. Names of officers dismissed without reason. They buried everything, he said quietly. His voice low but edged in. Steele? Tony nodded, eyes locked on another monitor. We leak it all at once. Social media journalists, independent networks. No one will be able to bury it again. But boss, that means we'll light up half the department. They'll come for us. Lorenzo didn't flinch. Let them come. Across the mansion. Maria paced the guest room. She'd been moved there that morning, told it was for her safety. But she couldn't shake the unease, the guards outside the windows, the constant whisper of voices through radios. Every time she looked out, she saw headlights waiting in the dark. Mirzchun entered quietly carrying a tray of food. "You should eat," Maria forced a small smile. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him." She paused, staring at the rain outside. What if this doesn't work? What if he finds me again? Mrs. Chun set the tray down and took her hand softly. "Child, you're safer than you've ever been, believe me." But Maria didn't believe in safety anymore. She believed in survival. Back in the study, Marco looked up, his voice tense. "Boss, you need to see this." He turned the screen. Derek Mitchell was on television in a live interview. Calm, smiling, lying through his teeth. "The Mafia is trying to destroy my reputation," he told the reporter. "They planted evidence to make me look corrupt. I've served this city for 15 years. I'm being targeted by criminals trying to silence Lorenzo's." Lips curved into something cold. "He's good. I'll give him that." He turned to Tony. "How long until the files are ready?" "Minutes, boss. We'll send them from 3 different countries. No traceable route, make it 5. Lorenzo said. "I want every outlet." Receiving proof at the exact same time, Tony's hand hovered over the keyboard. "You're sure once this hits, there's no going back?" Lorenzo's gaze hardened. He made Maria afraid for her life. "That's all the reason I need." 30 seconds later, Chicago's internet exploded. File drops hit every major network. Journalists opened anonymous emails filled with police documents, internal memos, bank records, photographs. The truth moved faster than bullets. Within an hour, the city was on fire. Maria heard it first through the television, breaking news flashing across the screen. Officer Derek Mitchell under investigation again, as new evidence surfaces linking him to corruption and abuse. Her hand flew to her mouth. She whispered his name, but this time not in fear, in disbelief. It was happening. The walls closing in on the man who had destroyed her life. At the same moment, miles away, Derek Mitchell sat in his car outside his uncle's house. His phone vibrating nonstop. His uncle's voice came through, furious. "What the hell have you done? Derek, every network in the city's calling for your suspension. I didn't leak anything. Someone's setting me up." His voice cracked. "They're coming for me. You did this to yourself," his uncle said. Before hanging up, the sound of that click filled the car with silence. Derek's breath came ragged, his eyes burning with rage. Then his gaze hardened. "Maria," he whispered. "It's her. It's all because of her." He started the engine, tires screeching, through the rain, heading straight toward the one person who dared to expose him. Back at the mansion, alarms tripped simultaneously. Marco turned pale. "We've got movement, boss." His car's on the traffic cams heading south toward Maria's building. Lorenzo didn't waste a second call. Sarah Chun, tell her to move her team. Now get units to intercept. He grabbed his coat and gun. Tony stepped in front of him. "Boss, let us handle it." Lorenzo's eyes were dark and dangerous. "No, this one's mine." The rain began again as Lorenzo walked out into the night, every drop falling like the heartbeat of the city itself. He knew where Derek would go, and what he would do. And if he was right, tonight would be the end of it all. One way or another, the predator was coming back for his prey, but this time the prey had a protector who didn't forgive and never forgot. Rain turned to thunder as the city braced for chaos. Police sirens cut through the night, but they were chasing ghosts. Derek Mitchell was already off the grid. His phone off his badge discarded his fury, guiding him like a weapon. Meanwhile, Lorenzo Duca's car sliced through the storm, a black shadow moving fast toward the south side. His men followed at a distance, headlights dimmed, engines humming low. Marco's voice came through the earpiece. "Boss, traffic cams lost him near Pilsen. Last ping shows him close to Maria's old building." Lorenzo gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. "He's not going there to talk. He's going to end it." Tony's voice followed from the second car. We've got Sarah Chun's team mobilized. Unmarked units setting up 2 blocks away. She wants to know if she should move in now. No, Lorenzo said, his voice calm but lethal. Not until we have eyes on him. I don't want a dead cop. I want a captured monster back in the mansion. Maria paced the living room, rain hammering against the windows. She had refused to stay in her room. The guards stationed outside weren't enough. Not when the city felt like it was holding its breath. She looked at the clock, every minute heavier than the last. Mrs. Chun tried to distract her, but Maria couldn't stop glancing at the door, expecting it to burst open. Expecting him. When her phone buzzed, she jumped the screen, lit up unknown number. Her blood froze. She answered, hands shaking. Hello, silence then. A voice she would never forget. Soft, deliberate Maria. The room spun. She backed away from the window, her heart racing. How did you get this number? She whispered. His laughter slithered through the line. You think you can hide behind him? You think your new boss scares me, Mers? Chun noticed her expression, pale and terrified. Who is it? Maria couldn't speak. Derek's voice was still talking. You ruined my life, now I'm coming to take it back. The line went dead. In the security room on the other side of the mansion, alarms blinked red. Marco looked up, panicked. Boss call trace, just hit her phone. Mitchell called her from less than 5 miles away. Lorenzo's car veered through the wet streets. Send me the coordinates. Now keep her inside. Lock the gates. If he steps onto my property, he won't walk back out. Derek's blue sedan sped through the city, rain streaking across his windshield. His eyes bloodshot, one hand gripping the wheel, the other reaching for the gun on the passenger seat. He didn't care about consequences, not anymore if he couldn't have peace. No one would, he muttered to himself. She thought she could destroy me. I'll show her what destruction looks like. Lorenzo reached the mansion just as lightning split the sky. His men were already in position. 2 at the gate, 4 near the east wall. He stepped out of the car. Rain soaking his suit, the wind carrying the faint sound of an approaching engine. He raised a hand. Silence fell, every guard listening. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter. That's him, Tony whispered. Lorenzo's hand went to his gun-hold positions. The blue sedan swerved through the open road, then crashed through the outer gate. Metal screamed against metal, sparks flying. The car spun to a stop on the gravel. Smoke rising from the hood, Derek stumbled out. Soaked, furious, gun in hand. His voice echoed across the courtyard. Maria, where are you? Come out, you coward. Inside. Maria heard the crash. She screamed. Mrs. Chun grabbed. Her arm. Get down. Stay away from the windows. But Maria's mind was frozen. The sound of his voice tore through every wall she'd built. He was here. Outside, Lorenzo stepped into the open rain pouring over his face. His voice cut through the thunder. Derek Mitchell dropped the gun. Derek's eyes locked on him through the haze. You're the one she's hiding behind. You think you can take my life apart. You think you can destroy me. Lorenzo didn't move. He already did that himself, he said quietly. Derek laughed a broken sound. I'll kill you first. Then I'll find her. But before he could lift the gun, 2 red dots appeared on his chest. Sniper sights from the roof. Tony shouted, Drop it now. Derek looked up, saw the lasers blink, and for the first time, real fear crossed his face. He fired one wild shot. The bullet ricocheted off the stone wall. The next instant, Lorenzo's men moved like a storm, tackling him to the ground. The gun skittered away, landing at Lorenzo's feet. Rain and sirens filled. The night, Derek struggled, screaming curses until a boot pressed his shoulder into the mud. Sarah Chun's voice rang out from the gate. Chicago PD, drop. Your weapons. Everyone freeze. Lorenzo raised his hands calmly. He didn't need to resist. He'd already won. Maria burst from the doorway. Eyes wide, she saw Derek on the ground. Soaked, defeated, handcuffed by the same badge he once hid behind. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lorenzo met her gaze across the chaos, a silent promise passing between them. It's over. The sirens wailed louder. The cameras flashed somewhere. A reporter shouted questions, but Lorenzo didn't hear any of it as he watched the man who had terrorized her, finally dragged away the city, that once ignored her cries would wake tomorrow to headlines about a fallen cop and whispers about the unseen hand that delivered justice. For the first time in years, Maria felt air in her lungs free of fear, and for Lorenzo Duca watching her crumble into tears of relief that was enough. Dawn broke over Chicago, but it felt like the city was still holding its breath. The rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and shining as if the world had been scrubbed clean. But inside the Duca mansion, the air was thick with tension. Maria sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the faint bruises on her wrist. Memories flickering like ghosts. She could still hear his voice from the night before. His rage. His threats. The gunshot that echoed through her bones. Even though he was gone, even though he was locked in a cell. Fear clung to her like smoke. Sirs Chun knocked softly before entering. She carried a tray of breakfast, untouched coffee juice bread. But she paused when she saw Maria's face. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Maria shook her head. "How could I?" Mrs. Chun smiled gently. "Because you're safe now, child." She hesitated, but Maria's eyes were still haunted. Safe doesn't feel real yet. Meanwhile, in his study, Lorenzo Duca sat across from Frank Russo, his consigliere. The blinds half-drawn, casting shadows like bars across the floor. On the desk lay a file marked Mitchell case, sealed by the state attorney's office. Frank leaned back, reading the morning newspaper. The headlines screamed it across every front page: corrupt cop arrested in mansion raid. Federal charges pending. "You're all over the news," Frank said. Lorenzo didn't look up. "I'm not in the story." Frank smirked. "Not by name. Maybe, but every man in this city knows someone. With your resources pulled the strings." Lorenzo finally met his gaze. Let them guess. Tony entered holding his phone, his expression grim. "We've got a problem, boss." Lorenzo's tone didn't change. "What kind?" "The kind that bleeds," Tony said, dropping the phone on the desk. A video played grainy footage from a traffic camera the night before. It showed Derek Mitchell being dragged out of his car, but not by police, by Lorenzo's men. 3 seconds too long before the official units arrived. Someone had leaked the unedited footage. "Who has it?" Lorenzo asked, already knowing the answer. "The Chicago Tribune." Tony said they're asking questions about vigilantism, about mafia involvement. Frank swore under his breath. "This isn't good, boss. They're going to start digging deeper." Lorenzo stood walking to the window. The city stretched out beneath him, calm on the surface, restless underneath. "If they dig," he said finally, "they'll find what I want them to find: a corrupt man taken down by his own sins, nothing more, nothing less." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't over. Men like Derek Mitchell didn't go quietly, and men like Vincent Mitchell. His uncle didn't forgive quietly either. At the county detention center, Derek sat in an interrogation room. His wrists cuffed, his face swollen from the night before. Across the table, a detective flipped through a stack of photos. Bank records and statements, every piece of evidence stacked neatly against him. Derek's laugh was low and bitter. "You think this will stick? You have no idea who my uncle is." The detective didn't look up. "Maybe not, but I know who's behind your fall." Derek leaned forward, his smile cold. "Lorenzo Duca, tell him. I'm not done." Hours later, Tony burst back into the study, again his face tight. "Boss, we just intercepted chatter from inside the department. Someone's trying to move Derek out of holding before the feds pick him up. They're calling it a transfer, but it's fake. A cover. He's not going to trial. They're breaking him out." Lorenzo's eyes sharpened when tonight, where Maxwell Street transfer point. Midnight Frank's voice was low. "You know what this means? If he gets out, he'll come straight here. Lorenzo's tone was ice. Then we make sure he doesn't get out as night fell again. Chicago's skyline glowed in fractured light rain beginning to fall. Once more, the Duca convoy rolled out black cars cutting through the storm. They weren't heading to make deals or threats. This time they were heading to where Maria stood by the window of her room watching the taillights vanish into the rain, her heart pounding. She didn't know where he was going, but she could feel it. Something dangerous. Something final. She whispered a prayer for him. Though she didn't understand why down. By the river, the convoy stopped near the old transfer station. Abandoned warehouses looming in the fog. Lorenzo stepped out, rain soaking through his coat. Tony pointed to a black van idling by the loading dock. Then through the rain, Lorenzo saw movement figures escorting a man in cuffs. Derek Mitchell, his face bloodied but alive. The fake cops dragging him toward the van before disappearing into the dark. Lorenzo's voice cut through the storm. Take them, all alive. Gunfire exploded. The night lit up with chaos. Shouts, metal, and rain mixing in a blur of violence. The air smelled of gunpowder and betrayal. Lorenzo moved with calm precision. Firing once, twice, men dropped around him until only one was left. Derek, on his knees soaked in rain and hate. You can't keep me down forever. He spat. His uncle will bury you all. Lorenzo lowered his gun. You already buried yourself as. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lorenzo turned to his men. Take him back to custody alive. Make sure the press knows it was the police who caught him. Tony hesitated, and the others. What about them? Lorenzo's gaze was cold. Clean up everything. No witnesses when he returned to the mansion hours later, drenched and silent. Maria was waiting, at the top of the stairs, her eyes searching his face. Are you hurt? He shook his head no more than usual. She exhaled, shaking the tension from her shoulders. You shouldn't have gone alone. He met her gaze steady. I had tow. She stepped closer, just enough for her whisper to reach him. Thank you for saving my life. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. Yes, I do. Maria's voice trembled. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened for the first time in years as thunder rolled outside and lightning illuminated her tear-streaked face. Lorenzo Duca finally understood that some wars weren't fought for power or revenge. They were fought to protect something fragile and pure, and for the first time he wasn't fighting alone. The morning after the gunfight, the city woke to headlines screaming of corruption, explosions near the river, and a failed police transfer. The media speculated the Mafia was behind it, but no one had names or proof. All they had was fear. Lorenzo Duca sat alone in his study, staring at the newspaper spread across his desk. Every line confirmed what he already knew. The war he had tried to keep quiet was now in the open. Mrs. Chun entered softly, her face tight with worry. You haven't slept, she said. Lorenzo didn't answer. He was reading a report Tony had dropped off at dawn. Vincent Mitchell, Derek's uncle, had resigned from the department overnight. Officially, it was health reasons. Unofficially, it was rage and shame. He had lost everything. His name, his badge, his power. But men like Vincent didn't disappear. They plotted. Maria appeared at the doorway, hesitant. She had been keeping her distance since the night at the river. But she couldn't stand the silence any longer. He looked up the moment he sensed her. She stood with her hands clasped nervously. I saw the news, she said softly. They're saying more people were involved, that it wasn't just him. Lorenzo's voice was calm. It doesn't matter what they say. It's over for him. She shook her head. No, it's not. People like that don't stop. They find ways back. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he stood and walked to the window. Rain had started again, thin and cold. You're right, he said quietly. They always find a way back. Later that day, Tony arrived, his expression grim. We've got movement, boss. Vincent Mitchell met with 2 federal agents this morning. Rumor is he's offering names in exchange for protection. He's trying To paint you as the man behind his nephew's downfall. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. How much does he really know enough to cause problems? He's desperate, and desperate men sell anyone. Frank Russo entered next, his tone sharp. We can't let this escalate. If the feds get involved, it won't be a police matter anymore. You'll be a national headline. Lorenzo glanced at both men. Let him talk. He'll hang himself with his lies. Frank frowned. Or he'll bring your entire operation down with him. Lorenzo's eyes were steady. If the government wants a villain, I'll give them one. But it won't be me. Cross the mansion. Maria was helping Mrs. Chun organize donations for the staff families when she overheard two guards whispering, Vincent. Mitchell's name. The words protection deal and hit list sent a chill down her spine. She dropped the papers and ran straight to the study, bursting through the door. Lorenzo turned sharply. Maria? What is it? Her voice shook. He's not going to stop. Is he Lorenzo's? Silence was answer enough. She stepped closer. Please stop all of this. It's over. Let it go before it takes you too. But Lorenzo shook his head. You don't understand, Maria. Some men can't live with humiliation. He's lost everything because of his nephew's sins. Now he's looking for someone to blame. And that someone is Maria's voice broke. Then take me away. Let me disappear. I'll go anywhere. Just don't fight him. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time there was no anger in his eyes. Only sadness. He stepped closer. You think? Running would save you. It won't. Vincent won't stop until he destroys everything connected to me, including you. Tony's phone buzzed. Breaking the silence, he glanced at the screen, then froze. Boss, you need to hear this. He turned up the volume. A voice came through, distorted but clear. Vincent Mitchell had been caught on a wire talking to a reporter. I'm going to make him watch his empire burn, just like he burned my family. The room went cold. Maria's hand went to her mouth. Lorenzo's tone was low and deliberate. We end this tonight by nightfall. The mansion transformed into a fortress. Guards doubled cameras online, the hum of engines outside echoing. Through the hallways, Maria sat in her room staring at the rain when she heard footsteps. She turned and saw Lorenzo in the doorway. His coat, dark, his eyes harder than she'd ever seen. I want you to stay downstairs with Mrs. Chun until I say otherwise, he said. She stood trembling. You're going after him, aren't you? He didn't answer. She grabbed his arm. Please don't. He looked at her hand, then at her face. I can't let him touch what's mine. She let go, watching him walk away into the storm at an abandoned parking structure near the river. Vincent Mitchell waited two men in suits beside him. One held a briefcase, the other a gun. The air smelled of oil and rain. Headlights cut through the fog. A black car rolling to a stop. Lorenzo stepped, out alone, his silhouette calm against the light. Vincent sneered, the ghost himself. I was beginning to think you'd send your dogs. Lorenzo took a slow step forward. I don't send dogs for trash. Vincent's smirk faltered. You think you've won, you. Think taking my nephew fixed anything I built this city's power. You're just another criminal hiding behind a code. Lorenzo's eyes glinted with quiet fury. You built corruption. I removed it. Difference is I know what I am. The man beside Vincent raised his gun, but before he could aim, two shots cracked the air. The man dropped instantly. Lorenzo's men appeared from the shadows, weapons drawn surrounding them. Vincent's face drained of color. You'll regret this, he hissed. Lorenzo stepped closer until their eyes met. You made Maria live in fear. You made me clean up your bloodline's filth. This isn't revenge. It's balance. He turned to his men. Take him as. They dragged Vincent toward the car. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Lorenzo looked up at the dark skyline, knowing this wasn't over. Not yet. The city still had its ghosts, and tonight, One of them would finally disappear, back at the mansion. Maria sat waiting. The clock ticking loud against the silence when the front doctor opened. She rose, heart pounding. Lorenzo entered, soaked to the bone, eyes tired but alive. She ran to him before she could stop herself. He caught her arm, steadying her. "It's done," he said softly. She looked up, tears falling. "Is it really over?" He nodded for now. Outside the storm passed, leaving only the smell of wet earth and the faint hum of a city slowly waking from its nightmare. Lorenzo looked at her then, out the window. His voice low and certain. "As long as I'm here, no one will ever hurt you again." Morning sunlight spilled across Chicago like a fragile promise. The storm had finally ended, but for Lorenzo Duca, the world still felt suspended between peace and danger. He stood on the balcony overlooking the city, coffee in hand, the skyline glittering. Beneath him, he had built this empire from shadows and secrets, but last night had changed something deep inside him. Vincent Mitchell was gone, erased from the map, the final piece of a chain reaction that had started with one woman's bruises behind him. The soft sound of footsteps broke the quiet. Maria walked out, wearing one of Mrs. Chun's shawls, wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the same unease that had lived there since the beginning. She stopped, beside him, the wind tugging at her hair. "You didn't sleep again," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Neither did you." They stood in silence for a long moment, the city waking beneath them. Maria finally whispered, "Is it over?" Lorenzo's voice was low. For now, she turned to look at him. "For now isn't peace. Lorenzo Duca, you deserve more than that." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where sunlight burned through the last remnants of storm cloud for the first time. In years, he felt something he couldn't name. Not guilt, not pride. Something closer to quiet understanding. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "I don't get peace. Maria, men like me don't get to stop downstairs." Frank Russo entered. Without knocking his face serious, the newspapers were already out this morning. He tossed one onto the table. "Chicago cleansed corruption scandal ends in mysterious disappearance." The headline was vague enough to protect Lorenzo's name, but the story between the lines was clear. The city was whispering about him. "You're a ghost again." Frank said the kind that haunts people until they confess their sins. Lorenzo didn't even look up. Maybe it's better that way. Mrs. Chun appeared behind. "Frank," her expression unreadable. "There's someone here to see you," she said, a pause. Then she added FBI agents. 2 of them. Silence fell. Maria's breath caught. Frank swore under his breath. "I told you the feds would smell blood." Tony appeared from the hall, already checking his weapon. Lorenzo lifted a hand. "No guns." The agents were escorted into the study. Moments later, both in plain suits, their faces polite but sharp. One of them, a woman with cold eyes, began the questioning. "Mr. Duca, we're investigating the disappearance of former Deputy Chief Vincent Mitchell. Last seen last night near the river. Witnesses reported hearing gunfire." Lorenzo remained perfectly still. "I don't know anything about that." The agent studied him for a long moment, then turned to the other, who nodded. "Mr. Duca will be in touch." They left as quietly as they'd come, the sound of their footsteps fading down the hall. Frank exhaled heavily. "You think they bought it?" Lorenzo picked up the paper again. "Maybe, but I didn't lie. I don't know what happened to Vincent after last night." He looked at Frank over the top of the paper, "and I don't care." That evening, the mansion was unusually still. Maria helped Mrs. Chun in the kitchen, but her thoughts were far away. She kept glancing toward the window, toward the city lights. She couldn't explain it, but part of her was afraid not of Derek, not of Vincent, but of what would happen now to Lorenzo. When she brought his coffee to the study, she found him, staring at the same photograph that had started everything. The image of her bruised wrist frozen in time, He looked up when she entered. She hesitated before speaking. "I wish I'd never brought this into your life." He shook his head. "You didn't. Bring it. I chose to take it." She walked closer. "Why?" "Because no one else would." He said simply. She blinked back tears. "That's not your job, Lorenzo." His voice softened. "It is now." She set the coffee down, but didn't leave her voice quiet and trembling. "Do you ever regret what you've done? The things you've had to do?" He was silent for a long time. When he finally answered, his words carried both steel and sorrow every night, he admitted. "But then I remember people like you. Maria. People who survive. The monsters this city protects. And I remember why I can't stop." She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his hand just for a moment before she pulled back. He caught her gaze, and in that shared silence, something shifted. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was trust. Fragile and rare, outside thunder rumbled far away. Not a storm this time, just the sky remembering what it had once held. The city lights flickered, and in that glow, Maria smiled faintly. For the first time, it wasn't fear that filled her chest, but peace, real peace. Days turned into weeks. Derek Mitchell remained in custody facing federal charges. The media moved on to new scandals. The FBI never found Vincent. His name faded from the headlines. The Duca mansion returned to its rhythm, though something inside it had changed. Maria no longer walked with her shoulders hunched. She laughed, sometimes even sang while cleaning, and Mrs. Chun made sure the halls smelled of warm bread and coffee again. One afternoon, Maria stood by the garden watching the flowers sway in the wind when Lorenzo appeared behind her, the sun setting in gold against his dark suit. She turned and smiled. "I was just thinking," she said softly. "When I first came here, I thought this house was haunted." "Maybe it was," he said, "but you drove the ghosts away." She laughed quietly, then turned serious. "You gave me my life back. Lorenzo, you gave me safety." He looked at her for a long time and finally said something he'd never said to anyone before. "And you gave me something I didn't think existed anymore." Humanity. She didn't know how to answer that. So she didn't. They simply stood there in the fading light. Two people who had both been broken in different ways, yet somehow found a kind of redemption in each other as the last light faded over Chicago. The world outside still whispered about the mysterious justice that had toppled a cop and silenced a king. But inside the mansion there was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant survival. Lorenzo Duca poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Maria. She took it, their hands brushing briefly before the city lights blinked on one by one. The world would keep turning. The powerful would still fall and rise again. But for that moment in a house built on shadows, there was peace, and for both of them that was enough. The end.